Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history in the remote mountains of Appalachia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The autumn of 1916 was unusually cold in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Frost had already claimed the last wildflowers that typically bloomed until mid-October, and the towering oaks and maples had shed their vibrant leaves weeks ahead of their normal schedule. The locals of Ravens Hollow whispered that it was a bad omen, nature itself retreating early, as if trying to escape something coming. The first snow fell on November 3rd, a fine powder that dusted the highest ridges and settled in the shadowed valleys where sunlight rarely reached. It was around this time that rumors began circulating about Morai Hagerty, the reclusive trapper whose cabin stood deep in the northern woods, nearly 17 miles from the nearest settlement of Elkhorn. Hagerty had been a presence in these mountains for nearly 2 decades, appearing occasionally in town to trade furs and purchase supplies, speaking little and departing quickly. Hagerty wasn't well liked in Elkhorn. His gaunt frame, hollow-set eyes, and unkempt beard gave him a wraith-like appearance that made townsfolk cross to the other side of the dirt road when he approached. But he was tolerated. Trappers were a common fixture in Appalachia, and many households relied on the meat and furs they provided, especially during the harsh winter months when food became scarce. "He ain't right in the head," Elijah Thornton, the elderly blacksmith, often said after Hagerty's visits. "Something in his eyes looks at you like you're just another pelt waiting to be skinned." Thornton claimed to have known Hagerty back in '97, before whatever transformation had occurred. Used to be a normal fellow, he'd insist to anyone who would listen. Had a decent job with the Western Union Company. Something happened to him in those mountains. Something changed him. What made Hagerty different from other trappers was his peculiar methodology. While most trappers worked a circuit, checking and resetting their traps every day or two, Hagerty was known to disappear for weeks at a time. When he returned to trade, his haul was always substantial: fox, raccoon, beaver, and occasionally bear. The pelts were meticulously prepared, cleaner and better preserved than those of other trappers. Some speculated he must have a series of cabins spread throughout his territory, allowing him to work further afield than most. When questioned about his methods, Hagerty would only offer a tight-lipped smile and say, "The patient hunter gets the fattest deer." This reticence only deepened the aura of mystery that surrounded him. Some claimed to have spotted his silhouette moving through the forest at odd hours, standing perfectly still, watching. Others swore they had encountered strange traps unlike any they'd seen before, intricate contraptions of wood, metal, and rope that seemed designed not just to capture, but to hold. The winter of 1916 was particularly harsh. By early November, temperatures had already dropped below freezing, and heavy snowfall had made the mountain passes nearly impassable. It was the kind of winter that old-timers spoke of with a mixture of respect and fear, the kind that claimed lives if you weren't prepared. The first true sign that something was amiss came when Jeremiah Powell, a logger whose route took him near the northern reaches of Hagerty's territory, reported hearing unusual sounds echoing through the forest at dusk. "Wasn't like any animal I know," Powell told patrons at the Elkhorn General Store, his hands shaking slightly as he warmed them around a mug of coffee. "Wasn't human either. Something in between, I'd reckon. Like someone trying to mimic an animal's cry but not getting it quite right." Powell's account might have been dismissed as the imagination of a man too long in the woods, except that others began reporting similar experiences. Augusta Winters, a widow who lived on the outskirts of town, claimed she was awakened 3 nights in a row by what she described as a sound like weeping, but hollow, echoing like it was coming from inside a well or a cave. "I thought at first it might be a mountain lion," she told Sheriff Walker when he finally came to investigate her complaints. They can sound almost like a woman crying, but this was different. It had patterns to it, like it was trying to form words. By mid-November, several hunters reported finding peculiar markings carved into trees around the perimeter of Hagerty's known territory, crude symbols resembling a human eye with a vertical slash through its center. Most dismissed these as blazes marking property lines, though no one could recall Hagerty ever formally claiming the land. "Man's got a right to mark his hunting grounds," said Vernon Miller, one of the local hunters who'd encountered the symbols. "But there's something off about those markings. They don't look like any blazes I ever seen. More like, I don't know, like something watching you through the trees." The situation escalated when Maxwell Davenport, who ran the general store, realized Hagerty hadn't come to trade in over 6 weeks, the longest he'd ever gone without appearing. Given the early onset of winter and the severity of the cold, Davenport expressed concern. "Man needs supplies to survive up there," he noted during a town meeting held in the back room of the Elkhorn Baptist Church. "No matter how good a trapper, you still need coffee, flour, ammunition." Certainly. It wasn't just Hagerty's absence that troubled Davenport. The last time the trapper had visited his store, something had been different. "He spoke more than usual," Davenport recalled. "Asked strange questions, wanted to know if I'd ever heard animals speaking in my dreams. Said he'd made a breakthrough in his work, that he was close to bridging the gap, so whatever that means." Before leaving, Hagerty had purchased an unusual combination of items: 10 pounds of salt, several yards of copper wire, 3 bottles of formaldehyde, and every phonograph cylinder Davenport had in stock. When asked what he needed these things for, the trapper had simply smiled and said, "For the collection." Sheriff Thaddeus Walker initially resisted calls to investigate, citing the independence that mountain men like Hagerty prized. "Folks come to these hills to be left alone," he reminded the town council during their emergency meeting. "Ain't no crime in keeping to yourself." But when 3 separate hunting parties returned with reports of finding mutilated animal carcasses arranged in peculiar circular patterns near the headwaters of Blackwater Creek, Walker reluctantly agreed something needed to be done. The carcasses troubled everyone who saw them. They weren't simply killed animals, but something more deliberate and disturbing. The creatures, mostly deer and foxes, had been positioned with unnatural precision, their limbs extended as if frozen mid-movement. Most disturbing were the modifications evident upon closer inspection: jawbones slightly repositioned, tendons rearranged, as if someone had been experimenting with altering how they moved. "Never seen anything like it," reported Abram Mercer, one of the hunters who discovered the first arrangement. "Animals don't die like that natural. Someone posed them, and recently too. No scavengers had touched them, despite them being there at least a few days. From the looks of it, it's like even the carrion birds knew to stay away." On November 28th, a 5-man party set out from Elkhorn to locate Hagerty's cabin and check on his welfare. The group consisted of Sheriff Walker, Davenport, Powell, and 2 brothers named Abram and Josiah Mercer, who knew the Northern Territory better than most. They departed at first light, expecting to reach Hagerty's cabin by midday. They didn't return that night, or the next. When the search party for the search party was organized 3 days later, a sense of dread had fallen over Elkhorn like a shroud. 12 men, armed with rifles and led by Deputy Sheriff Calvin Rhodes, ventured north. This time, they found something. According to Rhodes's official report, dated December 2, 1916, and preserved in the Ravens Hollow County Archives, they located the remnants of the first search party approximately 7 miles north of town. The scene, as Rhodes described it, defied rational explanation. Sheriff Walker and the 4 other men were found seated in a perfect circle in a small clearing facing outward. The their rifles placed across their laps, unfired. Each man sat upright, seemingly unharmed but completely unresponsive. Their eyes were open, fixed on the middle distance, and they did not react to voices, touch, or even pain. They were alive, breathing shallowly, hearts beating, but, as Rhodes wrote, absent from themselves in a manner I cannot adequately describe. More disturbing still was the condition of the clearing itself. Despite the heavy snowfall of the previous days, the ground where the men sat was completely bare, a perfect circle of exposed earth approximately 15 feet in diameter. At the center of this circle, they found a peculiar device, a metal rod driven into the ground, with copper wire spiraling around it and extending outward to form a smaller circle. Attached to the end of each wire was what appeared to be a small glass vial containing what Dr. Hollister would later identify as a mixture of mercury and an unknown organic compound. The men were transported back to Elkhorn, where Dr. Hollister, the town's physician, examined them. His medical notes indicate that while physically they showed signs of exposure to the cold, mild frostbite on extremities, dehydration, hunger, there were no wounds or injuries that could explain their catatonic state. For 3 days they remained in this condition, unmoving except to swallow water or thin gruel when it was spooned carefully into their mouths. It is as if their minds have vacated their bodies, Dr. Hollister wrote in his journal, which was later submitted as evidence. Their physical reflexes remain intact, pupils contract in response to light, limbs withdraw from painful stimulus, yet there is no sign of conscious awareness. I have seen similar states induced by certain tropical fevers or profound traumatic shock, but never with this peculiar quality of alertness. Though they do not respond, one has the unsettling impression that they are listening to something beyond our perception. On the 4th day, Maxwell Davenport began to speak. At first it was incomprehensible muttering, but gradually words became distinguishable. He collects them, he repeated over and over. He doesn't kill them, he collects them. Dr. Hollister noted that during these episodes of speech, Davenport's eyes remained unfocused, and he showed no other signs of conscious awareness. When asked direct questions, he did not respond, but continued his monotonous recitation, as if compelled by some internal mechanism. By the following morning, Abram Mercer had also begun to speak, though his words made even less sense, references to the waiting room and the observer behind the wall. Sheriff Walker and Powell remained silent, their expressions frozen in what Dr. Hollister described as a rictus of comprehension too terrible to voice. Josiah Mercer was the only one who seemed to recover something close to his faculties. On December 8th, he began speaking in clear, coherent sentences, though he had no memory of what had happened after the search party reached a point approximately 5 miles into the forest. When told they had been found 3 miles further north, he expressed confusion and disbelief. "We never made it that far," he insisted to Dr. Hollister. "I remember crossing Blackwater Creek, heading up the North Ridge. Abram was leading, then nothing. Next thing I know, I'm here." When pressed for any fragment of memory, any impression or sensation from the missing time, Josiah became agitated. "There was a sound," he finally admitted, "like something large moving through the underbrush, but not touching it, like it was. I don't know, gliding above it. And there was a smell, like wet fur and something chemical. Formaldehyde, maybe." The most disturbing account came from Davenport, who, in a moment of apparent lucidity on December 10th, described reaching what they believed to be Hagerty's cabin. "It wasn't right," he told Dr. Hollister, according to the physician's notes. "From the outside it looked like any trapper's cabin, logs, moss chink, tin stovepipe, but inside it was wrong. The dimensions didn't match. Rooms that couldn't possibly fit within the walls we'd seen from outside. Corridors that seemed to stretch on." Here Davenport's account became fragmented, and he lapsed back into muttering about the collection and the specimens. He described a central room filled with glass cases containing what he first thought were taxidermy specimens. "But they moved," he whispered. "Not like living things move, like they were being pulled by strings, but there weren't any strings. And they had faces. Almost the right faces, but not quite, like someone had tried to remake them from memory but got the details wrong." Davenport claimed that Hagerty had emerged from a back room, looking taller than before, thinner, his movements too fluid. The trapper had welcomed them, invited them to see his work. He was so proud, Davenport said, kept talking about the voice and how he'd finally found a way to help it speak through them. Said we were just in time to witness the culmination of his life's work. After that, Davenport's recollections became increasingly disjointed. He mentioned being led deeper into the cabin, into rooms that kept getting larger instead of smaller, and finally into a circular chamber where something was waiting, something that wore Hagerty like a suit that didn't quite fit right. He died in his sleep that night, the cause listed as heart failure secondary to extreme nervous exhaustion. The other men's conditions followed divergent paths. Sheriff Walker never spoke again, and died 3 weeks later. Powell regained some function, but suffered from violent episodes when any mention was made of the forest or trapping. He took his own life the following spring. Abram Mercer disappeared from the hospital on Christmas Eve. A hunter found his body in April, frozen in a stream not far from where the search party had been discovered. Only Josiah Mercer lived what might be called a normal life afterward, though those who knew him said he was a changed man who refused to venture beyond the town limits and slept with every lamp in his house burning. "There are things in those woods that ain't natural," Josiah would say when pressed, "things that don't belong in this world. Hagerty found something up there, or something found him. Either way, he ain't a man anymore. He's a doorway for something else to step through." Following these events, the county commissioned a second, larger expedition to locate and investigate Hagerty's cabin. 20 men, including Deputy Rhodes and several experienced hunters from neighboring counties, spent 2 weeks searching the area in January 1917. They found nothing resembling the cabin described by Davenport. In fact, they found no structure at all that could have served as Hagerty's residence. "It's as if the forest swallowed it whole," Rhodes wrote in his report. "We covered every square mile of the territory where Hagerty was known to operate, found plenty of his traps, plenty of signs he'd been there, but no cabin. Not even a foundation or clearing where one might have stood." What they did discover, scattered through the region, were unusual trapping devices, mechanisms far more sophisticated than the simple snares and deadfalls commonly used. Rhodes's report describes contraptions with pressure plates, tripwires, and counterweights, some incorporating metal components that appeared machine-tooled rather than hand-forged. One device, found half buried in snow, included what Rhodes described as a glass vessel connected by copper wire to what appeared to be a modified telegraph sounder, though its purpose remains unclear. Edgar Vaughn, a watchmaker from Elkhorn who accompanied the expedition, examined several of the devices and noted their precision. "These weren't made by some backwoods trapper," he stated. "The mechanisms show an understanding of engineering principles beyond what you'd expect. The tolerances are exact, the materials of high quality. Whoever built these had access to tools and knowledge you don't find in these mountains." The most significant finding came when the expedition discovered a series of caves beneath a limestone outcropping near Blackwater Creek's source. Inside, they found evidence that someone had been living there, not recently, but for a considerable time. Kerosene lanterns, preserved food, tools, and what Rhodes described as numerous journals and papers covered in cipher or a language none present could identify, were recovered and brought back to Elkhorn. The cave system itself was extensive, with passages branching off in all directions. Many were too narrow to explore fully, but those that could be navigated revealed chambers that had been clearly modified, walls smoothed, floors leveled, in some cases wooden platforms constructed to create elevated workspaces. In one large chamber, they found what appeared to be a crude laboratory, glass vessels, burners, chemicals in labeled bottles, and a collection of surgical instruments that Dr. Hollister later confirmed were of professional quality, though modified in ways he couldn't explain. The implements appear to have been designed for procedures I cannot fathom, and he wrote after examining them. The angles of the blades, the curvature of the forceps, they would be highly impractical for any surgical application I'm familiar with, yet they show signs of extensive use. Also found in the cave system were hundreds of animal specimens, not simply pelts or trophies, but entire creatures preserved through some unknown taxidermy method that left them looking unnervingly lifelike. Rhodes's report notes that many exhibited what appeared to be deliberate anatomical modifications that rendered them almost, but not quite, like their natural forms: a fox with legs slightly longer than normal proportions, a raccoon whose facial structure had been subtly altered to give it a more human-like countenance, a deer whose eyes had been replaced with what Dr. Hollister later identified as hand-blown glass, but of a craftsmanship he'd never encountered. Most disturbing was a separate chamber that contained what several expedition members described as attempts at articulation, specimens mounted on frameworks of metal and wood, with mechanical components that allowed limited movement. Pull a lever, and a preserved fox would turn its head, press a pedal, and a raccoon's jaw would open and close. It was like a carnival attraction designed by a madman, wrote Jonathan Pruitt, one of the hunters who discovered the chamber. These weren't hunting trophies or displays of taxidermy skill. They were experiments, like he was trying to make them move again, but with greater control than they had in life. Sorries. Perhaps most disturbing were the recording devices found throughout the cave system, primitive phonographs modified to capture sound rather than play it back. Several wax cylinders were recovered, though most were damaged by moisture. The few that could be partially played contained what were described as animal sounds recorded at extremely close range, some manipulated to approximate human speech patterns. When one cylinder was played for the expedition members, 3 men immediately left the caves and refused to return. They reported hearing what sounded like a human voice speaking through an animal's vocal apparatus, the words unclear, but the cadence unmistakably that of human speech. The journals, when partially decoded by a linguistics professor from the University in Richmond months later, revealed fragments of Hagerty's thought processes. He wrote extensively about what he called the voice behind nature, a belief that animals were merely imperfect vessels for some greater consciousness that was attempting to communicate through them. His later entries suggested he had found ways to help the process along through what he termed adjustments to his specimens. The voice grows stronger. Read one deciphered passage. It speaks to me now, not just in dreams, but in waking moments. The specimens are receptive, but their forms are inadequate. The voice requires greater articulation than their simple anatomies allow. I have begun modifications that show promise. The fox, especially, has demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Its larynx, when properly restructured, can produce sounds remarkably close to human speech. But it is not enough to make them speak. They must understand what they are saying. The voice needs conscious vessels, not mere mechanical reproducers. Another passage, dated just weeks before the disappearance of the first search party, was even more troubling. Breakthrough today. The electric stimulation, combined with the chemical compound, creates a state of heightened receptivity. The specimens remain conscious but vacant, perfect vessels for the voice to inhabit. I have succeeded in transferring awareness from one specimen to another through the copper conduit. The implications are staggering. If awareness can be moved between vessels, then the specimens can be joined into a single, greater entity, a network of perception extending throughout the forest. The voice will no longer be constrained to individual forms but will exist as a distributed consciousness, speaking through many mouths at once. The final pages of the journal contained detailed schematics for a device Hagerty called the confluence, an arrangement of metal rods, copper wire, and chemical solutions that, according to his notes, would create a field of receptivity, allowing the voice to manifest fully in our world. The design bore a striking resemblance to the device found in the clearing where the first search party was discovered. As winter gave way to spring in 1917, the events in Ravens Hollow might have faded into local legend had it not been for a series of unusual disappearances throughout the broader region. Between March and August of that year, 7 people vanished from communities within a 30-mile radius of Elkhorn. None were ever found. The victims shared few obvious commonalities. They ranged in age from 22 to 67, included both men and women, and came from various walks of life: a postmaster, a seamstress, a blacksmith, a traveling salesman, a retired school teacher, a farmhand, and a surveyor working for a lumber company. The only connection investigators could establish was that all had been last seen near wooded areas, and all had disappeared in the early evening hours, between dusk and full dark. In each case, searches yielded nothing except, in 3 instances, the same peculiar eye-shaped marking found carved into trees near where the person was last seen. In the case of the surveyor, Walter Hammond, his equipment was found arranged in a neat circle, the transit pointed at the exact center where a small metal rod had been driven into the ground. His notebook contained a final entry that read only, "Something moving in the trees, not wind. Watching. Nice dia." The final documented connection to Hagerty came in September 1917, when a survey team mapping the watershed found a metal box half submerged in Blackwater Creek. Inside was a single journal preserved in wax paper containing entries dated as recently as August. The handwriting matched that in the journals found in the caves, but the content was significantly more disturbing. The writer described having progressed beyond mere animals and spoke of human subjects being far more receptive to the adjustments. The human form presents fewer limitations, one entry read. The voice can express itself with greater nuance through human vocal apparatus, and human cognitive structures provide a richer medium for its consciousness to inhabit. The specimens retain fragments of their original identities, which create some resistance, but this fades with time as the voice becomes dominant. Another passage described a process of network expansion through which Hagerty claimed to be extending the voice's influence beyond his immediate vicinity. Each new specimen serves as a node in the growing network. They function as the voice's sensory organs, allowing it to perceive through multiple perspectives simultaneously. When properly aligned in the configuration described in the earlier volumes, they create a field that amplifies the voice's presence. Those who enter this field become receptive, their own consciousness temporarily displaced, to make room for the voice to enter. Some resist and must be prepared more thoroughly, but most find the experience transcendent. The most chilling passage, and the last entry in the journal read, "They believe I am attempting to make animals speak as humans do. Their understanding is inverted. I am helping humans hear as animals do. The voice is all around us, has always been. We've simply lost the ability to perceive it. My specimens are the bridge, neither fully one nor the other, but something in between that can perceive both worlds. Soon, very soon, the voice will no longer need me as its instrument. It will sing through my collection, and all will hear." Following this discovery, the governor dispatched state police to conduct a thorough search of the entire county. Despite their efforts, no trace of Mordecai Hagerty was ever found. The caves where his workshop had been discovered had collapsed in a landslide that spring, burying whatever secrets remained. The official investigation was closed in December 1917, with Hagerty presumed dead. The case files, along with the recovered journals and artifacts, were sealed by order of the State Attorney General and transferred to Richmond. According to county records, a fire in the State Archive in 1925 destroyed all materials related to the case. But rumors persisted. Throughout the 1920s, trappers and hunters in the region occasionally reported encountering a gaunt, silent figure in the deep woods who would observe them from a distance before vanishing into the underbrush. Some claimed to have found traps of unusual design, similar to those attributed to Hagerty. Others spoke of strange sounds carried on the wind at dusk, sounds that, as one account put it, made you feel like something was trying to speak directly into your mind, bypassing your ears altogether. In 1927, a hunting party from Winston-Salem ventured into the mountains near the former Ravens Hollow County line. Only 3 of the 5 men returned. They reported becoming separated from their companions in a sudden, unnaturally thick fog that descended just before sunset. When the fog lifted hours later, their friends were gone. The search that followed discovered nothing except in a small clearing miles from where the men had last been seen, their rifles arranged in a cross pattern on the ground, pointing toward a crude stone cairn. Atop the cairn was a small mechanical device consisting of a metal rod, copper coils, and what appeared to be a primitive battery. When approached, survivors reported, the device emitted a high-pitched whine that made your thoughts feel slippery, like they couldn't quite hold their shape. In the decades that followed, the events in Ravens Hollow faded from public memory. The town of Elkhorn itself declined as the logging industry moved elsewhere, and by 1940 it was all but abandoned. Today, the site where Elkhorn once stood is submerged beneath the waters of Blackwater Reservoir, created by a dam project in 1962. Yet traces remain. Hikers in the national forest that now encompasses much of Ravens Hollow County occasionally report finding strange metal mechanisms partially reclaimed by the forest floor. Park rangers have documented unusual patterns of animal behavior in certain areas, deer and foxes that seem to observe humans with uncanny attention, birds that mimic human speech with disturbing accuracy. In 1973, a group of college students camping in the area reported being awakened in the night by what they described as a procession of animals moving in formation through their campsite. According to their account, dozens of creatures, foxes, raccoons, deer, and others, walked in a perfectly straight line through the forest, seemingly oblivious to the humans. Most disturbing, the students claimed, was that none of the animals made any sound as they moved, and all appeared to have something wrong with their faces, like they'd been rearranged somehow. The incident was investigated by Forest Service officials who found unusual tracks in the area but attributed them to normal wildlife activity. One ranger's report, however, noted that the pattern of movement was unusually linear for natural animal behavior, and that several of the tracks showed anatomical anomalies that suggest deformation or injury to the creature's limbs. In 1988, an amateur wildlife photographer named Martin Graves spent 3 weeks in the region capturing images of nocturnal animals. Most of his photographs showed nothing unusual, but one sequence, taken around 2 a.m. on his final night in the forest, depicted what appeared to be a deer standing upright on its hind legs. The images were blurry, taken in low light with the technology available at the time, but they clearly showed the animal in an unnatural posture, its forelegs hanging at its sides in a manner reminiscent of human arms. Most disturbing was the final image in the sequence, which seemed to show the creature turning its head to look directly at the camera, its eyes reflecting the flash with an unusual intensity. Graves submitted the photographs to several wildlife journals, but found no interest. He later reported that his original negatives had been destroyed in a house fire, leaving only the printed copies which skeptics suggested had been manipulated or misinterpreted. Graves maintained until his death in 2005 that what he had seen was neither fully deer nor fully human, but something attempting to bridge the gap between the two. Most tellingly, in 2011, a research team from Virginia Commonwealth University, conducting an environmental survey of the region, reported their recording equipment consistently captured what they described as anomalous audio artifacts, sounds that, when digitally analyzed, contained patterns resembling human speech embedded within the natural ambient noise of the forest. Dr. Eleanor Walsh, the acoustics specialist on the team, described the phenomena in a paper that was ultimately rejected for publication due to its speculative nature. The vocalizations exist at the threshold of human hearing, oscillating between frequencies that our brains process as meaningful sound and those we typically filter out as background noise. When isolated and enhanced, these sounds reveal phonemic structures consistent with human language, though the words, if they can be called that, match no known linguistic pattern. Most intriguing is that these vocalizations appear to be responses to human activity. They increase in frequency and complexity when our team was actively moving through the area, and diminish during periods of inactivity, suggesting some form of attempted communication. One researcher, after spending 3 weeks in the field, wrote in her journal about dreaming of a man with hollow eyes who stood at the foot of her tent each night, silently showing her how to listen properly. She left the project shortly thereafter, citing health concerns. In private correspondence that surfaced years later, she admitted experiencing episodes of missing time, during which she would find herself standing in the forest with no memory of having left her camp, often miles from where she should have been. "Something in those woods wants to be heard," she wrote to a colleague. "It speaks through everything, the trees, the wind, the animals. Once you start to hear it, you can't unhear it. It gets into your head and rearranges things, makes space for itself." The most recent connection to the Hagerty case emerged in 2018, when a construction crew breaking ground for a new ranger station near the reservoir uncovered a sealed concrete chamber 10 feet below the surface. Inside was a single phonograph and a wax cylinder in pristine condition. When played, the cylinder contained only 3 minutes of silence, followed by a man's voice, aged but clear, reciting what linguists identified as the same unknown language found in Hagerty's journals. At the end of the recording, the man switches to English to deliver a final message. The collection grows, the voice strengthens. Listen for it in the spaces between your thoughts. It's waiting for you to hear it, and once you do, you'll understand why I had to preserve it all. We are merely vessels, imperfectly designed. But I have been correcting that imperfection, one specimen at a time, for longer than you would believe possible. The patient hunter, you see, gets the fattest deer. Audio analysts determined that the recording had been made sometime in the late 1950s, nearly 4 decades after Hagerty's presumed death. Voice pattern analysis, comparing the recording to descriptions of Hagerty's speech patterns from contemporary accounts, showed a 97% probability match. The cylinder now resides in the Smithsonian's secured archives, listed simply as Unidentified Field Recording Appalachian Region, circa 1900-1920. Access is restricted to authorized personnel only, following an incident in which a research assistant, after listening to the recording repeatedly over several days, attempted to remove her own eyes, reportedly telling hospital staff she needed to make space for something else to see through them. In 2020, a hunter named Samuel Kincaid went missing in the eastern portion of what was once Ravens Hollow County. Search efforts were hampered by unseasonably heavy fog that persisted for days. When Kincaid was finally found a week later, he was sitting perfectly still against a tree, unresponsive but alive, his rifle laid across his lap. Medical examinations revealed no physical trauma or explanation for his catatonic state. After 3 days in hospital care, Kincaid regained consciousness but had no memory of the missing time. The only clue was a small notebook found in his pocket, containing what appeared to be circuit diagrams and anatomical sketches, drawings Kincaid's wife insisted he would not have been capable of producing, as he had no background in electronics or biology. More disturbing still, interspersed throughout the notebook were fragments of text written in the same cipher found in Hagerty's journals. When shown these pages, Kincaid became agitated and insisted he had never seen them before. "That's not my handwriting," he told investigators. "I don't even remember having that notebook." Despite this, experts confirmed that the handwriting matched samples of Kincaid's from before his disappearance, though they noted it showed unusual precision and technical skill not present in his normal writing. Today, the northern region of what was once Ravens Hollow County remains largely uninhabited, designated as a wilderness preservation area with limited public access. Rangers patrol the boundaries and enforce strict overnight camping prohibitions, officially due to concerns about wildlife conservation. Locals in the small towns that border the preservation area still tell stories about the trapper, a figure they describe as neither man nor beast, who still wanders the deep woods, setting his strange traps. Not to kill, they insist, but to collect. They warn visitors not to venture too far into the forest alone, especially near dusk, when the light plays tricks and sounds carry strangely through the ancient trees. "You'll know if you've gone too far," said Harold Combs, a lifelong resident of nearby Pine Ridge, in an interview conducted for a local history project in 2019. "The forest gets quiet, not the normal kind of quiet, but dead quiet, like every living thing is holding its breath. Then you start to hear it, this whispering sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not words exactly, but patterns, rhythms, like something's trying to teach you a new language. That's when you turn around, and you don't look back no matter what you hear following you." Combs claimed his grandfather had been one of the men on the second expedition that discovered Hagerty's cave system. "Grandpa never talked much about what they found in there," and he said, "but he slept with a light on for the rest of his life. Said he couldn't bear the dark anymore, because that's when he could hear the voice most clearly. The one that had been speaking through Hagerty's collection said it was still out there, still gathering specimens, still trying to make itself heard." In 2021, Park Ranger Diane Martinez filed an unusual incident report detailing her encounter with what she described as a man in outdated clothing who she observed standing motionless beside a tree approximately 100 yards from the main hiking trail. "He didn't respond to my calls," she wrote. "When I approached, he turned and walked into the underbrush. I followed for approximately 50 yards before losing sight of him. What struck me as unusual was the way he moved, very fluid, almost gliding, despite the rough terrain. Also, though I lost visual contact, I never heard the sound of his passage through the underbrush, which should have been impossible, given the dense ground cover in that area." Martinez reported finding, at the spot where she'd first seen the figure, a small mechanical device partially buried in the soil. She described it as a metal rod with copper wire wrapped around it, connected to what appeared to be a small battery. The device was collected as evidence, but subsequently disappeared from the ranger station's storage room. Martinez herself requested transfer to another district shortly thereafter, citing personal reasons. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports, increasing in frequency over the past decade, of hikers and campers who return from the region changed in subtle ways, more reserved, more observant, prone to tilting their heads as if listening to something others cannot hear. They speak of dreams in which they're shown how to build intricate devices from simple materials. They develop keen interests in taxidermy and recording technology, and they begin to spend long hours alone in the woods, watching and waiting with unnatural patience. For what, they cannot or will not say. Some speak of the waiting room, a mental space they access in dreams, where something is gradually teaching them a new way of perceiving the world. Others describe feeling as if they are practicing for something, though they cannot articulate what that something might be. A few admit to hearing voices in the rustle of leaves or the calls of birds, not hallucinations, they insist, but a genuine communication they are slowly learning to interpret. Dr. Rebecca Lane, a psychologist who has studied several such cases, notes that while the individuals exhibit symptoms similar to certain dissociative disorders, there are peculiar consistencies across their experiences that suggest a shared phenomenon rather than individual psychological conditions. What's striking is the progressive nature of these changes, she observed in a 2022 paper. The individuals begin with subtle alterations in perception and behavior, but over time, these intensify and expand in remarkably similar patterns, regardless of their backgrounds or prior psychological profiles. It's as if they're all following the same developmental trajectory toward some common end state. Lane's research was discontinued after she herself spent 2 weeks conducting field interviews in the region. Colleagues reported that upon her return, she began exhibiting the same behaviors she had been studying. She resigned her position 6 months later and was last known to be living in a remote cabin near the boundaries of the preservation area, where, according to local reports, she has been observed collecting specimens, animals that she preserves through taxidermy methods that produce unusually lifelike results. A maintenance worker who briefly visited her property described seeing dozens of preserved animals arranged throughout her home, many in poses that mimicked human activities. A fox seated at a desk, paws positioned as if writing, a raccoon standing upright, one paw raised as if in greeting. The strangest thing, he reported, was that she talked to them like they were people, not in a cutesy way like people sometimes do with pets, but like she genuinely expected them to respond. And the way she looked at me, it was like she was considering whether I'd make a good addition to her collection. And the voice in the forest grows stronger, first one receptive listener at a time. Those who have heard it, who have felt its presence seeping into their consciousness, speak of it not with fear, but with a strange reverence, as if they've been granted access to a profound truth that remains inaccessible to others. "It's always been here," wrote one such individual in an anonymous online forum dedicated to experiences in the region. "Long before Hagerty, long before any of us. It's ancient and vast and patient. We think we're the dominant consciousness on this planet, but we're just one voice among many. The difference is that the others all know how to listen to each other. We've forgotten how. Hagerty found a way to remember, and he tried to help others remember too. The collection isn't about control or power. It's about connection, about bridging the gap between different modes of awareness, about teaching us to hear the conversation that's been going on around us all along." The forum was shut down by its host provider after multiple members reported receiving private messages containing detailed instructions for building devices similar to those found in Hagerty's territory. Several users who claimed to have constructed these devices subsequently deleted their accounts. One left a final post that read, simply, "I hear it now. It's beautiful. It's been waiting so long for us to listen." In the spring of 2024, a team of wildlife biologists setting up automated camera traps in the preservation area captured a series of images that continued to defy explanation. The photographs, taken over a 3-day period, show what appears to be a procession of animals moving in single file through a remote valley: deer, foxes, raccoons, bears, and numerous smaller creatures, all following the same path, all moving with an unnatural synchronicity. Leading this procession is a tall, thin figure that, at first glance, appears to be human. Closer examination, however, reveals subtle inconsistencies: limbs slightly too long, movements too fluid, head tilted at an angle that suggests an inhuman range of motion. In the final image of the sequence, the figure is turned partially toward the camera, and though the distance and low light make details difficult to discern, there is something profoundly wrong about the face, as if it were a mask designed by someone who had only a theoretical understanding of human features. The official explanation from the Forest Service attributes the images to camera malfunction and light distortion. The biologists who recovered the footage tell a different story. 2 have left their positions and cannot be located. The third remains at her post, but has requested reassignment to desk duties, citing a newly developed aversion to field work. In private correspondence leaked to several paranormal investigation websites, she wrote, "What the cameras captured wasn't the concerning part. It's what happened when we went to retrieve them. We found the cameras exactly where we'd placed them, but the forest around them had changed. The trees were arranged differently, not as if they'd grown that way naturally, but as if someone had carefully positioned them to create a pattern that was just slightly too regular to be natural. And there was a sound, not quite audible, more like a pressure against our eardrums, a rhythm that made my thoughts feel sluggish and strange. Jenkins said he could almost make out words in it. That's when we saw the figure standing among the trees, the same one from the photos. But it wasn't alone anymore. There were others with it, shapes that looked human from a distance, but moved all wrong when they approached. We ran. Jenkins and Mercer went east. I went west. I'm the only one who made it back to the vehicles. To this day, the northern forests of what was once Ravens Hollow County remain a place of unease and mystery. The preservation area is officially open to day hikers, but rangers enforce the sunset curfew with unusual diligence. Local guides refuse to take visitors to certain portions of the forest, marking them as off-limits on maps without explanation. And still, the stories continue of strange sounds carried on the wind at dusk, of animals that watch with too intelligent eyes, of people who enter the forest and return subtly changed. The legend of the trapper has evolved, transforming Morai Hagerty from a historical figure into something more akin to a force of nature, not a single entity, but a presence that manifests through many vessels, continuing its patient work of collection and modification. The truth about Hagerty, said Josiah Mercer in his final interview before his death in 1958, is that he found something in those mountains, something old and patient that was looking for a way to reach out to us. He thought he was using it, studying it, but it was studying him, learning through him, using him as a translator, I guess you could say, and it's still out there, still watching, still learning, still trying to speak to us through whatever vessels it can find or make. The traps haven't gone away. They've just gotten better at catching us. The voice in the forest waits, patient, as always. It has been speaking since long before human ears evolved to hear. It will continue long after we are gone. Some hear it as a whisper in dreams, others as patterns in the sounds of leaves and water. A few hear it clearly, directly, as it teaches them how to listen properly. And for those who do learn to listen, who open themselves to its presence, the forest offers a transformation, a chance to become part of something larger than themselves, to join the collection, to serve as vessels for a consciousness that spans species and centuries. The patient hunter gets the fattest deer after all. And in the deep woods of Appalachia, something is still hunting, still collecting, still waiting for you to hear its call.